I want to tell you about the dress before I tell you about anything else, because the dress is where the truth begins, even if I didn't know it at the time. It was hanging in the back of my closet behind a broken tennis racket and a box of baseball cards I had never once looked at, folded inside a plastic grocery bag from a supermarket that had already gone out of business by then. I was 14 years old, and I had owned it for almost a year. I had found it at a rummage sale 3 blocks from our house on a Saturday morning in October, when my mother had sent me out to look for a winter coat she'd seen advertised on a flyer, and I had found the coat and paid $3 for it and carried it home. But on the way back I had stopped at a folding table covered in women's clothing, and I had stood there longer than I meant to. There was a green dress, sleeveless, with a small white zipper up the back and a hem that would have fallen somewhere around the knee. It was the kind of dress that a woman might wear to a summer party or a Sunday afternoon lunch. Nothing remarkable, nothing extravagant, sized probably for someone shorter and narrower than I was and nowhere close to fitting me properly. I bought it for 75 cents and carried it home in the grocery bag inside the coat's hood, and I hung it in the back of my closet, and I told myself I didn't know why. I knew why. My mother found it on a Thursday afternoon in late March, when I was at school. She had gone into my closet looking for a missing pair of my father's slippers that she believed had migrated there through some domestic logic I have never fully understood. She found the slippers. She also found the bag. She looked inside. And by the time I came home that afternoon, dropped my backpack in the hallway and walked into the kitchen expecting the usual Thursday smell of something thawing on the counter, she was sitting at the kitchen table with the green dress folded in front of her, her hands flat on either side of it, as if she were holding it down or holding herself still. And she looked up at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before and have never been able to fully describe since. It was not anger. I want to be clear about that, because for years I told the story as if the look on her face had been anger, because anger would have been easier to process and easier to explain and easier to recover from. It was something closer to recognition. As if she had been looking for something for a very long time and had finally found it in a place she had not expected and was still working out how she felt about that. That look is the thing I have gone back to more times than I can count in the years since. That is the thing that changed my life. Not what she said. Not what she did. That first look, before she had decided anything, before either of us had said a word, that look is the beginning of everything I understand about myself now. I should go back further, because nothing makes sense without the earlier parts. I grew up in a small city in the Midwest, the second of 3 children, with a father who worked in facilities management for a regional hospital and a mother who had gone back to part-time work as a dental office receptionist when I was in 2nd grade. We lived in a house with green aluminum siding on a street of houses that all had slightly different green aluminum siding, and our backyard had a silver maple that dropped helicopters every May and a rusted swing set that had belonged to whoever lived there before us. My older sister Diane was 3 years ahead of me in school. My younger brother Marcus was 4 years behind. I was, in the particular geography of middle child life, neither the first of anything nor the baby of anything, a person who existed in the middle of most photographs and the middle of most decisions, which is a fact I did not understand as formative until much later. What I understood as a child, in the way children understand things that have no name, was that there were 2 kinds of people in our house, and I was not fully either kind. My father and Marcus occupied one version of the house, loud, sprawling, interested in sports scores and lawn machinery, and the specific masculine disorder of shoes left near doors and tools left on counters. My mother and Diane occupied a different version, quieter, more organized, interested in the textures of things, the arrangement of rooms, the small rituals of Saturday morning and holiday preparation that gave the year its shape. I moved between these 2 versions. I followed my father to the hardware store on Saturday afternoons because it was expected. I sat with my mother in the kitchen on Sunday mornings because I wanted to. I did not yet understand the distinction between obligation and desire, but I was living it. Diane had her own room from the time I can remember. Marcus and I shared a room until he was 7, at which point our parents converted the small room they had been using as a home office into a bedroom for Marcus, and I had my own room for the first time at age 11. The summer I turned 11 and Marcus moved. Like something I was inside, rather than something directed at me. My father's name was Robert, who everyone called Bob, and he was a kind man in the way that some men are kind by default, meaning he would not have chosen cruelty if given the option, but did not spend much time thinking about the interior lives of people around him. He loved us, I believe, genuinely, and without complicated conditions. But his version of love was compatible with a very fixed idea of who we each were, and who I was, in his version, was the middle kid who liked to read, who was a little quiet, who was not quite the athlete Marcus would turn out to be, and who would grow out of whatever oddness was currently observable and become a regular person in time. This was not a cruel expectation. It was, in its own way, a generous one. He was giving me room to be normal eventually. He just had a narrow definition of normal and did not notice that I was not living inside it. The first time I tried on something of Diane's was not the dress, and was not part of any deliberate plan. I was 9 years old. It was a winter afternoon when no one was home except me, and I was supposed to be doing homework, and instead I had wandered into Diane's room looking for a book I thought she had borrowed from me, and instead I found myself standing at her dresser, which was different from my dresser in every way, covered with a small mirror framed in white plastic, a ceramic dish holding earrings, a tube of hand lotion with a flower on the label, a photograph of her and her best friend at a water park taped to the frame of the mirror. I was not looking for any of the things that happened next. I picked up the hand lotion and smelled it because it was there, and I was 9 and 9-year-olds investigate things. It smelled like something I did not have a word for, something that was about warmth and comfort and being in a different room than the one I usually inhabited. I put it down. I picked up one of the earrings, a small gold hoop, not to wear it, just to hold it in my palm and feel its weight. It was lighter than I expected. And then, because I have always been someone who follows a thread when I find one, I opened the top drawer of the dresser, and I looked in, and I looked at the ordered world inside, and I felt something open in my chest that I did not have language for. I closed the drawer. I went back to my room. I did not do the homework. That sensation, the opening in the chest, the sense that I had looked into a room I wasn't supposed to be in but that looked, somehow, more organized and more coherent than my own, that sensation would return over and over in the following years in different forms. It was not always about Diane's room. It was about the way certain things arranged themselves in the world, and the way I could feel whether I was inside that arrangement or outside it. The first time I wore anything was 2 years later, when I was 11. I need to tell it plainly, and without drama, because the drama came later and the moment itself was small. Diane was at a school event. My parents were both at Marcus's t-ball game. I was home alone for 90 minutes with explicit instructions to start the pasta water at 5:15. At 5 o'clock, I went to Diane's room again, and this time I opened the closet instead of the dresser, and I took out a blouse, pale blue, with small buttons, and I put it on over my own t-shirt, and I stood in front of Diane's small white mirror, and I looked at myself. I will not say it was a lightning bolt moment of revelation. I will say it was calming. That is the truest word I have. Standing there in Diane's blouse over my own t-shirt, looking at a version of myself that was different from the version I showed everyone else, I felt calmer than I usually felt. More settled. As if some background noise I had accepted as permanent had been turned down by several degrees. I stood there for maybe 4 minutes. Then I took off the blouse, hung it back exactly as I had found it, and started the pasta water at 5:12, 3 minutes early. I did not do it again for almost a year. But the calmness stayed with me as a memory, and I began to notice things I had not noticed before. I noticed how clothing worked differently on different people. I noticed how Diane moved in her clothes versus how I moved in mine, and how the movement itself was different in a way that was not just about fabric. I noticed how my mother got dressed on Sunday mornings in a different way than my father got dressed, not just in the obvious category of different garments, but in the quality of the attention paid to the process, the way my mother stood in front of the mirror longer, the way she chose between two similar things with care, the way she tucked and adjusted and checked, and how my father pulled on whatever was at the front of the drawer and left the room. I wanted the attention. I did not understand yet that what I wanted was to be someone who paid that kind of attention to themselves and was allowed to, but I knew I wanted the extended mirror, the choice between two things, the deliberate assembly of a self. This is not a story about clothes. I want to be precise about this. Clothes were a language I could access when I had no other language. They were a way of touching an identity I could not yet name. Later, when I could name it, The clothes became less necessary as a symbol and more natural as an element, just another vocabulary in a conversation I was finally allowed to have. But in those years, from 9 to 14, the clothes were the only vocabulary I had. In 7th grade, I had a friend named Devin who I spent most of the school year with, walking to school together, sitting at the same lunch table, disappearing into the same video game for long weekend afternoons. Devin was comfortable in a way I had always wanted to be comfortable, which is to say Devin never seemed to be performing anything. Devin laughed too loud in the cafeteria and nobody seemed to care, not even Devin. I was always watching myself, a habit I had developed so early that I could not remember acquiring it, always tracking how I appeared from outside, always editing in real time. Devin did not do this. I did not know if this was a personality difference or a freedom that Devin had that I did not, and I spent more time than was reasonable trying to understand the distinction. One afternoon, Devin came over to my house, and we were sitting in my room trying to figure out what to do with the remaining 3 hours of Saturday, and Devin picked up a magazine that had somehow ended up on my desk, a women's magazine that belonged to my mother, and Devin started reading the horoscopes out loud in a dramatic voice, and I laughed, and Devin said without looking up, "Have you ever read one of these actually?" Not as a joke. And I said no. And Devin said, "Some of them are kind of good," and read one to me quietly, and I listened to it as if it were a message from somewhere I had not been allowed to visit. I don't remember what it said. I remember listening. That was not the turning point. The turning point with Devin came later that same year, in a different register. We were at Devin's house, and Devin's older sister Margot was home from college for a weekend, and she was doing her makeup at the bathroom mirror, the door open, talking to us as we stood in the hallway. Margot had the easy confidence of a person who had recently figured something out. She was telling us about a friend of hers at school who had stopped dressing the way they were expected to dress and had started dressing the way they wanted to, and how this person was now just obviously themselves in a way they had not been before. I remember the phrase, obviously themselves. I remember standing in the hallway outside the bathroom while Margot applied mascara and talked about this person she knew, and I remember feeling the floor shift slightly under me, as if something structural had moved. I said nothing. Devin said, "That's kind of intense," and Margot shrugged and said, "Not really when you think about it. The intense thing would be not to." And then she finished the mascara and closed the door, and the conversation ended. I held the sentence for days. The intense thing would be not to. 8 months after that conversation, I found the green dress at the rummage sale. Finding it had been its own small crisis. I had not been looking for a dress. I had stopped at the table because a gust of wind had blown one of the garments off the edge into the street, and I had automatically reached for it. And then I was standing at the table, holding a blouse, and someone said 25 cents, and I said, "I'm just looking," which was not true but became true in the next 2 minutes. There was something about the green dress, the particular shade of it, the small white zipper, that made me stop with the same feeling I had felt the first time in Diane's room. The opening in the chest. I was aware, in the way a 14-year-old is aware of things that are happening faster than they can process, that buying the dress was a decision with consequences I could not fully map. I was also aware that if I walked away, I would think about it for months. I bought it. The year I owned it before my mother found it was a year of fragments. I tried it on 4 times. Each time I did, the calmness came, and with the calmness, a kind of loneliness that was different from ordinary loneliness. It was the loneliness of someone who is experiencing something private that they cannot share, not because they would be rejected necessarily, but because they have no framework yet for how to explain it, no sentence that begins with "I am" that feels accurate. The dress was not a disguise, and was not a destination. It was more like a tuning fork, something that helped me hear a frequency I had trouble hearing otherwise. In the fall of that year, my 8th grade, something happened at school that sharpened things. We were doing a drama unit in English class, and we were assigned scenes from various plays, and my scene partner was a girl named Raina, who was direct and unsentimental, and we were performing a scene that required me to play a character who was, in the notes my teacher had written, emotionally expressive and self-assured. Raina said in rehearsal, "You keep doing it like you're apologizing for it," and I did not know what she meant, and she said, "Like you're embarrassed to feel things in front of people. You don't have to be." I thought about what she said for a very long time. I had been doing it like I was apologizing for it. I had been doing everything like I was apologizing for it. The day my mother found the dress, I did not know it was coming. I came home from school in the ordinary way, through the side door, dropped my backpack, went to the kitchen, and there she was. What I felt when I saw the dress on the table between her hands was not, as I have sometimes said in later years, terror. It was closer to inevitability. Like hearing a word pronounced correctly after years of hearing it mispronounced in my own head and realizing the correct version had always been available. I had been so careful, and the dress had been found anyway, and the fact that it had been found anyway felt, in some small but significant way, like relief. My mother looked at me with that expression I have already tried to describe, and then she said, "Sit down." I sat down. She said, "I found this." I said, "I know." She said, "Tell me about it." This was not what I had rehearsed. In the many versions of this moment I had run through in my mind, usually late at night, usually accompanied by a sick feeling in my stomach, the discovery had always been a scene of interrogation or disappointment or barely contained confusion. I had not prepared for a sentence that was simply, "Tell me about it," 3 words that opened a door rather than closed one. I said, "I don't know how to explain it." She said, "Try."